The morning Claire left 3 suitcases on my porch. She smiled and said, "You're retired now, Evelyn. What else do you have to do?" She had no idea that 2 weeks with her children would expose a life she had spent nearly 2 years building without any of us. 2 days earlier, I had stood beneath a banner in the Worthington Elementary gym while 35 years of my life were reduced to cake, carnations, and a gold-framed certificate. Former students had returned with children of their own. Teachers I had once mentored told stories about paint spilled on report cards and clay animals that exploded in the kiln. Everyone kept asking what I planned to do next. I gave them the answers people expect from a newly retired art teacher. I might travel. I might garden. I might finally organize the basement studio. The truth was that I had no plan. When I returned home, the silence felt larger than the house. My husband, Richard, had been gone 5 years, but his coffee mug still sat behind the glass cabinet door. His brown jacket remained in the hall closet because I had never found a good enough reason to move it. On my desk was the wooden box of oil pastels he had given me on our 30th anniversary. For 35 years, school bells had told me where to be. Now no sound required anything from me. Claire called Thursday afternoon. The summer program was cancelled, she said without saying hello. A plumbing failure had closed the recreation center where Mason, Grace, and Owen were supposed to spend the next 2 weeks. Claire had a sales conference in Miami, and Nathan was overseeing the final phase of a hospital expansion. "We're in a bind," she said, although her tone suggested the bind had already become mine. I asked when she needed help. "Tomorrow morning." I should have said I needed time. I should have reminded her that retirement was not the same as permanent availability. Instead, I thought about how little I had seen my grandchildren that year. One hurried Christmas dinner, Grace's school concert, and 20 minutes at Owen's birthday party before Claire announced that he was overtired. 2 weeks, I said, but we need to agree on some ground rules. Claire exhaled as if I had complicated a simple delivery. She arrived at 9 the next morning. Mason, 13, climbed out first, headphones covering his ears. Grace, 10, followed with a tablet pressed against her chest. 7-year-old Owen stayed in the back seat until Claire told him twice to move. Claire placed 3 suitcases beside my welcome mat, then handed me a canvas bag filled with chargers, medication, snacks, and a typed schedule. Mason sleeps late. Grace won't eat eggs. Owen needs a night light. Don't let them call Nathan during work unless it's an emergency. They can always call their father. Her smile tightened. That was when she looked past me into the quiet house and made her comment about my retirement. I felt the words land exactly where she intended. In Claire's mind, the end of my career had turned my time into an abandoned room anyone could use. I looked at the children. None of them looked pleased to be there. But Owen's lower lip was trembling. 2 weeks, I repeated, and in this house, we follow 4 rules. We don't insult one another. Everyone cleans up what they use. Devices stay downstairs after 9. And no one is denied food, embarrassed, or frightened as punishment. Mason rolled his eyes. Claire gave a short laugh. You always did love classroom rules. They worked for 35 years. She kissed the air near each child's cheek, promised to call that night, and hurried toward her SUV. Owen watched until the vehicle disappeared. Not one of them waved. Inside, Mason dropped his backpack in the hallway. Grace asked for the Wi-Fi password before removing her shoes. Owen stood beneath Richard's old coat and stared at me as though waiting to learn which version of his grandmother he had been warned about. That evening, Claire did not call. I made chicken and rice, ignored Mason's complaint that it smelled weird, and showed them their rooms. At 10, after the lights were off, I heard voices through the guest room door. Stop worrying, Mason whispered. Then Grace answered, barely loud enough for me to hear. Mom said Grandma would be tired of us by the second day. I stood alone in the hallway, wondering what else Claire had told them about me. By 9 the next morning, I understood that the children had not arrived expecting to be loved. They had arrived expecting a trial. Mason came downstairs wearing the same clothes as the day before. He looked at the oatmeal, toast, and strawberries on the table and said, "This smells old. Toast has smelled approximately the same since people discovered fire," I said. Grace almost smiled, then caught herself. She slipped her phone beneath her thigh even though I had already reminded her that devices stayed off during meals. Owen reached for the milk and knocked over a cup of orange juice. He froze, his face emptied of expression, and he stared at me as if a verdict were coming. "Get a towel, please," I said. "You're not mad?" "I'm not delighted, but those aren't the same thing." He cleaned the table with both hands, checking my face every few seconds. The first real explosion came before lunch. I asked Mason to bring his backpack upstairs. He kicked the leg of the entryway table hard enough to rattle the framed photographs. "Mom said we wouldn't have to listen to your stupid rules." I moved the glass bowl from the table before answering. "You're allowed to be angry, Mason. You're not allowed to make everyone else afraid of your anger." His expression changed for half a second. It was not remorse. It was surprise. I had taught children long enough to recognize the difference between cruelty and armor. Cruelty enjoys the wound. Armor strikes first because it expects to be hit. That afternoon, I opened the basement studio. It was not a dark storage room, as Claire had once called it. Wide windows sat just above the garden, and the walls were lined with brushes, paper, clay, and jars of colored pencils. My old security camera covered the stairs and shared work area. Richard had installed it after a break-in down the street, and I had kept it running after his death. There were no cameras in bedrooms or bathrooms, only the front door, hallway, living room, and studio. I checked the indicator light before letting them downstairs, a habit born from living alone rather than any suspicion of my grandchildren. "You don't have to make anything," I told them, "but you can." Mason stayed near the stairs with his arms crossed. Grace picked up a violet pencil, put it down, then chose it again. Owen drew 5 people standing beside a blue ocean. One figure, a tall man, was covered in heavy black crayon. "Who is that?" I asked. Owen placed his hand over the drawing. "Nobody." I did not press. Grace drew a house with 3 windows and no door. Mason watched her for several minutes before announcing that art was pointless and going upstairs. Later, I found Grace in the living room holding a photograph from 7 years earlier. Nathan had taken it at the Columbus Zoo. I was crouched between Mason and Grace, with baby Owen asleep against my shoulder. We looked sunburned and happy. "I don't remember this," she said. "You were 3. You wanted to take a penguin home." She traced the edge of the frame. "Did you really tell Mom you didn't want us here anymore?" The question hurt more than Claire's comment on the porch. "No," I said. "I never told her that." Grace looked at me, waiting. I could have defended myself by listing every unanswered invitation and every holiday Claire had shortened. But Grace was 10. She did not need evidence against her mother. She needed one adult willing to tell the truth without making her carry it. "Your mother and I had disagreements," I said. "Seeing you became difficult. I stopped fighting as hard because I told myself I was keeping the peace." "So you did leave." I stepped back. "But I understand that. To a child, those can feel like the same thing. I'm sorry." Grace leaned against my shoulder, lightly enough that she could move away if she changed her mind. That evening, Owen asked for 3 helpings of spaghetti. Mason complained but ate 2. When a fork slipped from Owen's hand and clattered against the floor, he flinched again. After dinner, I heard raised voices in the room the boys shared. "You promised," Mason hissed. "I forgot," Owen said. When I appeared at the doorway, Mason stepped in front of his brother. Owen peeked around him and asked, "Is Uncle Julian coming when we move to the ocean?" Mason spun toward him. "Shut up, Owen." The room went silent. I knew every brother, cousin, and family friend Claire had ever mentioned. I had never heard the name Julian. For one suspended second, no one moved. Owen stared at Mason as if he had broken something that could not be repaired. Grace lowered her eyes. Mason's face hardened, but beneath the anger I saw fear, the raw, cornered fear of a child who had been assigned an adult secret and told that keeping it was an act of love. I wanted to ask who Julian was. Every question crowded behind my teeth. Instead, I crouched beside Owen. You are not in trouble, I said. None of you are. Mason gave a bitter laugh. You don't know that. Then I won't make you explain tonight. After they were asleep, I called Nathan. Machinery groaned behind his voice. He was still at the hospital construction site. The kids are under a lot of strain, I said. Something came up tonight that I think you should know about. When I mentioned Julian, Nathan went quiet, then exhaled sharply. Claire works with dozens of people. Mom, he could be a client. He may be. Claire told me you've never trusted her. The words hurt because they carried an old accusation. That concern was merely judgment wearing a kinder coat. I'm not accusing anyone, I said. I'm asking you to pay attention. I have to finish this inspection. He hung up with a promise to call later. He did not. Long after the call ended, I stood at the sink. For years, Claire had translated every concern I expressed into an attack. And Nathan had accepted her version because it spared him from choosing sides. I had responded by becoming smaller, fewer visits, fewer questions, fewer chances to be accused of interfering. That silence had not created the secret in my guest room, but it had given the children nowhere to set it down. I decided then that I would not interrogate them, recruit them, or turn their fear into evidence. I would remain steady enough for the truth to arrive on its own. The next afternoon, Grace asked to use my laptop for a library book. Mason followed her into the dining room. Don't, he warned. Dad deserves to know. And then what? He leaves, or he gets sick again, or everything falls apart. Nathan had once spent a night in the emergency room with chest pain that proved to be stress. To Mason, apparently, fear had turned that memory into a prophecy. Owen began crying at the kitchen table. Mom said we promised, he whispered. She said we couldn't ruin her new beginning. I sat between them and kept my voice even. Adults are responsible for adult choices. Children should never be asked to protect those choices. Grace opened a public page for a Miami charter company. Its newest post showed smiling passengers aboard a white boat beneath a copper sunset. Claire stood near the rail. Her body turned toward a dark-haired man whose hand rested at her waist. The caption thanked Julian Bennett and his guests for celebrating the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. The post was dated that morning. Claire's conference schedule, still public online, had ended the day before. I copied the link and sent it only to Nathan. No screenshot to friends, no family gossip. Whatever the photograph meant, humiliation did not need an audience. Nathan arrived after 9. Dust marked the knees of his work pants. He studied the image at my kitchen counter, enlarging it until the faces blurred. Maybe the company wrote the caption, he said. Maybe there were other people. Mason stood in the doorway. There are always other people, he said. She makes us call him Uncle Julian. Nathan slowly turned. Mason's chin trembled, but he continued. Claire had introduced Julian during 2 previous trips. She had said she and Nathan were figuring things out. She warned the children that if they told, their father might make them choose between parents. Nathan gripped the counter. What broke across his face was not simply the pain of a husband seeing another man's hand on his wife. It was the recognition that his children had been carrying knowledge he had been too absent to notice. I thought working more kept you safe, he said. Mason looked at him. Are you going to die because we told? Nathan crossed the room and held his son, though Mason stayed rigid for several seconds before yielding. No, Nathan said, and none of this is yours to fix. Later, after the children settled, Nathan stared through the dark window. If this is all she's hiding, he said, we can survive it. The next morning, he pulled his own credit report. There were 2 accounts he had never opened. Nathan called me before 7. His voice sounded controlled in the way a glass looks solid just before it shatters. Mom, I need the kids to stay with you today. He did not tell me more, and I did not press. I made pancakes while he sat in his car at the curb. Laptop open against the steering wheel, learning the shape of a second life measured in balances and dates. The 2 credit cards carried nearly $24,000 in debt. One showed charges for Florida hotels. airfare, and furniture deliveries. The other listed consulting fees and payments connected to real estate. Both accounts used Nathan's name and social security number. Neither had been opened with his knowledge. Then he reviewed 18 months of joint bank statements. Claire had always managed the household finances, and Nathan had usually checked only the ending balance. Now the small transfers became visible, $500 here, $900 there, amounts modest enough to resemble ordinary spending. 6 weeks earlier, $38,000 had gone to a Miami escrow company under the memo, investment deposit. By noon, Nathan was sitting across from Rebecca Sloan, a Columbus family law attorney recommended by a colleague. Rebecca did not promise revenge. She asked for dates, statements, account agreements, and the exact words the children had used. When Nathan called the missing money theft, she corrected him gently. If Claire was an authorized owner of the joint account, the bank may have permitted the transfer. She said, that does not make the conduct harmless. Concealing marital funds or moving them to build a separate life can become financial misconduct in a divorce. But we should describe what we can prove, not what anger tells us to call it. She tapped the credit report. These cards are different. If they were opened using your identity without your consent, that may involve fraud. Report the accounts through the proper channels and preserve every record. Nathan asked whether he should search Claire's email. Not by guessing passwords, using saved credentials that are not yours, or accessing a private account without permission. Lawful evidence helps you. Improper access can damage your credibility and create another problem. Her instructions were precise. Save copies of statements and the public boat post. Contact the card issuers and credit bureaus. Redirect his new paycheck to an individual account, while continuing necessary household expenses. Do not empty the joint account in retaliation. Do not confront Claire until they had considered the children's safety and the possibility that she might try to remove them. Before leaving Rebecca's office, Nathan froze his credit files and changed the passwords on accounts that belonged to him. Rebecca told him to document each action and keep communication with Claire centered on the children. Filing a fraud report, she warned, would begin a separate process. It would not settle the marriage or determine custody overnight. Real consequences, he was learning, came through forms, waiting periods, and careful records, not a single confrontation that restored justice before dinner. Still, procedure offered something rage could not, a path he could follow without becoming reckless. For the first time, Nathan had to admit that his ignorance had not been created by trust alone. I liked not knowing, he said, as long as the mortgage cleared. I could tell myself the family was fine. Rebecca waited. Claire handled the money. She handled school forms, appointments, everything, he continued. I called it teamwork, but mostly I was letting her carry the parts of our life I didn't want to look at. Taking responsibility now matters, Rebecca said. Punishing yourself does not protect your children. Becoming present might. That evening, Nathan returned to my house with a paper grocery bag and cooked spaghetti. Though we already had dinner. It was the kind of practical gesture people make when they cannot repair what matters. Mason watched him strain the pasta. Are we poor now? He asked. Nathan set down the colander. No, but some choices were made without my knowledge. And I'm fixing what I can. He did not call Claire a thief. He did not show the children account balances or ask them for more information. That restraint cost him something. And I was proud of him for paying it. After they went outside, Nathan said, I kept thinking you would say you warned me. I did warn you, I replied, and you didn't listen. But being right is not the same as being helpful. Rebecca called shortly after 8. The bank's wire record identified the escrow file number and the specific condominium unit. In the Harper's shared mortgage folder, Nathan then found a scanned preliminary occupancy form. The form did not list Claire as the buyer. It listed Julian Bennett. Beside his name, Claire appeared as future co-occupant. The words future co-occupant seemed almost polite. They did not describe betrayal, or the money taken from our family, or 3 children being taught to rehearse lies. They sounded like a label on a moving box. Nathan read the form twice. Then he closed the folder. I want to call her, he said. Rebecca told you not to. I know. Knowing and enduring were different things. He walked onto my back porch, where the children were catching fireflies in a jar. Mason held the lid. Owen chased lights through the grass. Grace stood apart, watching her father through the screen. That night, after her brothers were asleep, she came into the kitchen carrying a purple flash drive. I didn't steal it, she said before either of us spoke. Nathan pulled out a chair but did not reach for the drive. Grace explained that Claire kept an inexpensive phone for her Miami trips. During their last visit, Claire had handed it to Grace to play music in the hotel room. Notifications appeared while Claire was downstairs, frightened by what she saw. Grace copied the phone's photo and download folders onto the flash drive using her school Chromebook. I thought if Mom changed her mind, I could erase it, she whispered, then everything could be normal. Nathan's face tightened. Did Mom ask you to copy anything? Grace shook her head. Did Grandma? No. He slid the drive into an envelope without opening it. You should never have had to decide what to do with this. He said, from now on, the adults handle it. Rebecca arranged for a digital forensics consultant to examine the drive and the travel phone. She warned us that finding a file did not automatically make it authentic, complete, or admissible. The consultant would preserve the originals, calculate digital hashes, examine metadata, and document where each item appeared to come from. Nathan was told not to browse, edit, forward, or post anything. Waiting was its own kind of punishment. Claire texted cheerful photographs from Miami and asked whether the children were behaving for Grandma. Nathan answered only that they were safe. Each ordinary message felt like a hand smoothing a tablecloth over broken glass. I watched Nathan draft and delete replies. The man he had been wanted an explanation, the father he was trying to become understood that a furious message might return to the children as a burden. He placed his phone face down and went to play catch with Owen. 2 days later, Rebecca called us to her office. Most of the files were ordinary, beach photographs, restaurant receipts, screenshots of furniture, and condo floor plans. They did not form a perfect confession. Some had uncertain origins, others merely confirmed that Claire had been preparing for a life in Florida. One file was different. It was a voice message created on the travel phone and addressed to Julian. The metadata was consistent with the date shown, although Rebecca said an expert would still need to explain its limitations if it were ever used in court. Claire's voice came through the speaker, low and impatient. Once I get them to Florida, Nathan won't have the energy to fight me. He can barely manage work and dinner now. The recording lasted 11 seconds. Nathan lowered his head. I expected anger. What came instead was shame. She knew exactly where I was failing, he said. Rebecca stopped the audio. Recognizing your failures does not make her plan acceptable. Both truths can exist. Another preserved screenshot showed an appointment confirmation with a Florida family law firm, dated 6 weeks before Claire's supposed conference. It did not reveal legal advice, which could be privileged. It did establish that she had consulted counsel before the trip and before Nathan knew the marriage was in danger. There were also messages in which Claire described Ohio as temporary and told Julian she expected the children to join them, once the timing is right. No departure date appeared. No signed custody agreement existed. Still, the pattern was no longer a husband's suspicion assembled from one photograph. It was preparation. On the drive home, Nathan asked whether Grace had listened to the voice message. Probably, I said. He closed his eyes. When we reached my house, he found her drawing alone at the dining table. She had divided a sheet of paper into 2 homes. In one, her father stood beside us. In the other, Claire stood beneath a bright orange sun. Grace had drawn herself in the white space between them. Nathan sat beside her. You do not have to choose a parent tonight, he said. You do not have to prove which home you love. Grace pressed her pencil so hard the tip broke. But Mom already chose. Nathan looked at the 2 houses and finally understood that evidence could protect a child in court someday. But it could not answer the question breaking her heart now. Rebecca's first concern was not building the most dramatic case. It was stopping the children from carrying more of it. She referred Nathan to Dr. Lena Wallace, a licensed child psychologist in Columbus. Before the first appointment, Dr. Wallace explained that therapy was not an interrogation and that she would not coach the children for court. Her job was to understand their distress, help them feel safe, and report only what professional ethics and the law required. Nathan signed the consent forms. Claire was still reachable and retained parental rights. So Rebecca advised him to follow the clinic's procedures concerning parental notice rather than pretending Claire no longer existed. Because the situation involved possible coercion and an anticipated custody dispute, every step had to be documented carefully. Dr. Wallace met each child separately. Mason sat with his arms folded and answered most questions with, "Fine." He became angry whenever anyone used the word secret. Grace asked whether telling the truth could make a judge send her mother to jail. Owen wanted to know whether stress could stop a father's heart. Dr. Wallace did not diagnose them after one afternoon. She scheduled follow-up sessions and taught Nathan simple responses: do not demand details. Do not criticize Claire in front of them. Do not promise outcomes he could not control. Repeat that the conflict belonged to adults. Repeat that love was not measured by silence. At home, progress appeared in moments too small for a courtroom. Owen began sleeping with his bedroom door open instead of climbing into my bed. Grace helped me water the tomatoes but checked the driveway whenever a car slowed down. Mason still challenged every rule. Yet one evening he apologized after snapping at his brother. None of them had been transformed. They were merely testing whether safety would remain after they misbehaved. On the 13th day, Mason threw a glass against the kitchen wall. It happened after Claire called. She spoke to each child privately. But Mason emerged pale and furious. When Nathan asked what was wrong, Mason shouted that everyone was using him, then hurled the glass into the sink. It struck the tile and scattered across the floor. I guided Owen and Grace into the living room. Nathan did not grab Mason or shout back. He waited until the boy's breathing slowed. "You can be angry," Nathan said. "You cannot throw things where someone could get hurt." Mason stared at the shards. "She said you're trying to take us from her." "I am trying to keep you safe while the adults figure this out." "That's not an answer." "No," Nathan said. "It's the only honest answer I have tonight." The next morning, Nathan told Dr. Wallace about the call. Across several sessions, the children had described being pressured to keep Claire's relationship secret, being warned that disclosure would destroy Nathan, and being told they might lose whichever parent they disappointed. Dr. Wallace said the pattern raised concern about emotional coercion. She did not call Claire evil or declare the children permanently damaged. "They love their mother," she said. "That attachment does not disappear because they are afraid of her choices. Asking them to reject her would create another wound." With Rebecca's guidance, Nathan made a report to the County Children's Services Agency. He gave facts rather than conclusions, the children's statements, the threats they described, the travel phone preserved by the expert, and Dr. Wallace's professional concern. He did not claim physical abuse. He did not ask a friend inside the agency to intervene. A caseworker named Patricia Cole arrived. She explained that she was independent and that she would speak with the adults and children separately. She would not tell us who had made every statement, and she would not resolve custody at my kitchen table. I showed her the common area security footage only after she requested relevant material. It documented the children's early outbursts and our responses. It did not show private bedrooms or bathrooms. Nathan provided records through Rebecca. Patricia asked me about routines, discipline, medication, meals, and whether I had ever told the children their mother did not love them. "No," I said. "Whatever Claire has done, they are not safer if I teach them to hate her." Patricia interviewed the children without Nathan or me in the room. When she left, she offered no verdict. Her face revealed nothing. That evening, Grace cried because she missed her mother. Mason refused dinner, still angry at everyone. Owen asked Nathan twice whether he was going to die. Nathan answered twice. "I'm here. I'm getting help. You were not responsible for keeping me alive." Later, I found him sweeping beneath the refrigerator for pieces of the broken glass. I thought 13 days would be enough to fix something, he said. 13 days can be enough to stop pretending, I told him. He nodded and kept sweeping. For now, that was what healing looked like. The next morning, Nathan stopped hoping that patience alone would keep the children in Ohio. He met Rebecca before the courthouse opened. She had prepared a complaint for divorce and several requests for temporary relief. One asked the court to name Nathan the children's temporary residential parent. Another sought to prevent either parent from removing them from Ohio without written agreement or court permission. She also requested orders protecting marital assets and barring both spouses from creating new debt in the other's name. We ask for what the facts support, Rebecca said. A judge will not punish Claire because you are hurt. And temporary orders are not a final custody decision. Nathan signed his affidavit. It described the children's statements, Claire's Florida plans, the unfamiliar credit accounts, the condominium deposit, and the preserved voice message. Rebecca attached only evidence she could authenticate responsibly. Dr. Wallace provided a careful statement about the children's distress and the need for stability. Not a recommendation that Claire lose permanent custody. Patricia's investigation remained open. Rebecca made that clear too. There was no crowded courtroom and no dramatic speech. A clerk stamped papers beneath fluorescent lights while families waited on wooden benches. Nathan sat with both hands around a paper cup of coffee and looked less like a man seeking victory than someone admitting his marriage could no longer be repaired by silence. No television camera captured the moment. The machinery of protection was ordinary: signatures, numbered exhibits, sworn statements, and people checking boxes. Yet I understood later that quiet procedures can carry a family across dangerous ground. If the judge says no, he asked. Then we prepare for the hearing and use every lawful safeguard available. And if the judge says yes? Claire still receives notice and an opportunity to be heard. This is protection for the immediate situation, not the end of her relationship with the children. By late afternoon, the judge had reviewed the sworn filings. The court issued limited temporary orders. The children were to remain in Ohio. Nathan was designated their temporary residential parent until an expedited hearing. Neither parent could conceal, transfer, or dispose of significant marital property outside ordinary household expenses. Claire was not stripped of parental rights. But she could not take the children from Nathan's care or travel with them out of state before the hearing. The order also directed both parents to avoid discussing the litigation with the children and to preserve relevant financial and electronic records. Nathan read every page. It feels like I'm taking them from her, he said. You are asking a court to hold the situation still long enough to examine it. Rebecca replied. At my house, I told the children only what they needed to know. They would stay with Nathan. They would not be traveling. And a judge would help the adults make decisions. Grace asked whether Claire knew. Mason asked whether she could ignore the order. Owen asked whether judges slept in the courthouse. Nathan answered the first two. I handled the third. That evening, he moved from my couch to the dining room table and began rearranging his life. He spoke with his supervisor about reducing overnight site visits. He added school calendars to his phone, made a list of pediatric appointments, and learned that Owen disliked the seams in certain socks. These were small facts Claire had carried for years. Nathan received them not as proof that she had been a good wife or a bad one, but as evidence of how much parenting he had surrendered. Mason watched him copy emergency contacts. Are you doing this because a lawyer told you to? I started because she told me to, Nathan said. I'm continuing because I should have known already. Near midnight, Rebecca called. The forensic consultant had completed an additional review of the travel phone's download folder. Among airline confirmations and travel advertisements was an itinerary purchased 5 days earlier. 4 passengers were listed: Claire, Mason, Grace, and Owen. Their flight would leave Miami the morning after Claire was scheduled to collect the children from me. It was not a return flight to Ohio. The tickets were one-way, bound for San Jose, Costa Rica. Nathan sat without speaking. Rebecca cautioned that an itinerary did not prove Claire intended to disappear. Plans could be cancelled, vacations could be misunderstood, but the timing, one-way route, Messages about moving the children, and absence of Nathan's knowledge created a risk the court needed to see. "Where are their passports?" she asked. Nathan went pale. Claire had kept them in the fireproof box at home. He drove there with the temporary order and asked a sheriff's deputy to stand by while he retrieved essential records from the marital residence. The box was in the closet. The children's passports were gone. Claire returned the following afternoon in a white rental SUV. 11 minutes earlier than the time she had given me. I watched from the front window as she checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her hair was pulled into a smooth knot, and she wore the cream suit she saved for sales presentations. For one irrational moment, she looked exactly like the woman who had once brought me soup after Richard died. Then she stepped out and called, "Kids, let's go." No one moved. Nathan stood beside the fireplace. Rebecca waited near the dining room, present as counsel but not pretending to be an officer of the court. A licensed process server remained on the porch. We had agreed that the children would stay upstairs until the papers were delivered. But 3 frightened faces watched through the railing. Claire saw Nathan through the open doorway. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk after you've received the documents." The process server confirmed her name and handed her the packet. Claire stared at the first page. "A divorce?" Her eyes moved rapidly across the temporary orders, the hearing date. Nathan's temporary designation, the requirement that the children remain in Ohio, the restrictions on extraordinary transfers of marital property, and the command to preserve records. "You filed while I was away?" "I filed after I learned what was happening." Claire looked past him at me. "You did this." The accusation entered the room like smoke. For years, I might have defended myself until my voice shook. This time, I kept both feet planted. "Nathan made his decisions," I said. "The court made its own." She turned to Rebecca. "I'm taking my children home." Rebecca's voice remained calm. "The order says they remain in Nathan's care pending the hearing. You should contact your attorney immediately. No one here is asking you to sign away custody or waive your rights. I don't need your permission to see my children. This is not a final judgment. It is a temporary court order, and violating it may have consequences." Claire's composure cracked. "Nathan, she has always hated me. She has spent 2 weeks turning them against me." Nathan flinched but did not retreat. "Mom didn't open the cards. She didn't transfer the money. She didn't buy the tickets." Claire's face changed at the last word. "What tickets?" The question came too quickly. Nathan did not answer. Rebecca had warned him not to conduct an interrogation on my porch. Claire pushed past the threshold before stopping herself. The process server stepped aside but did not touch her. Nathan moved between Claire and the staircase. "You can speak to them from here if they want to come down," he said. "No questions about the case. No asking them to choose." For a moment, I saw something beneath Claire's anger that looked like panic. Perhaps she had imagined a different arrival. Suitcases by the door. Children rushing into her arms. The rest of us still ignorant. "Mason," she called. "Grace? Owen? Mommy's home." The children appeared one at a time. Owen came first, holding the railing. At the sight of Claire, his face folded with longing. He took 2 steps down, then retreated behind me when I reached the bottom stair. Grace followed. Claire opened her arms, but Grace remained on the landing. "Honey," Claire said, "come give me a hug." Grace began to cry. "I miss you," she whispered. "Then come with me." Grace shook her head. "I can miss you and still be scared." Claire lowered her arms as if they had suddenly become too heavy. Mason descended last. He positioned himself 1 step below Grace. His narrow shoulders squared in front of his siblings. "You told them things about me," Claire said. "You told us things about Dad. I was protecting you. You made us protect you." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. There was no triumph in the room. Claire was their mother, and every truthful sentence wounded someone who still loved her. She looked at Mason with the authority she had always used to end arguments. "Get your things." Mason did not move. "Dad knows about Julian." Silence followed. Claire's gaze passed from Mason to Grace. Then to Owen. She seemed to understand that the secret had not been stolen from her by a lawyer, a grandmother, or a court. It had become too heavy for her children to carry. Claire's mouth opened, but no command came out. She looked less like a strategist than a mother confronting the cost of her own choices. Nathan's expression softened, though his position did not. He told her that contact would follow the order and Dr. Wallace's guidance. She could challenge the allegations at the hearing. What she could not do was take the children into the SUV and make the questions disappear. Outside, the rental SUV continued running, its empty back seats facing my house. The expedited hearing took place 9 days later in the Domestic Relations Division of the county court. By then, Claire had hired her own attorney. She entered wearing navy blue and sat without looking toward us. Nathan kept his hands folded on the table. I waited behind him, close enough to be seen but far enough to remind myself that this was his marriage and his responsibility. The magistrate began with a warning. The hearing concerned temporary parenting arrangements and immediate safety. It would not decide every financial dispute, determine criminal liability, or permanently erase either parent from the children's lives. Claire's attorney argued that Nathan had overreacted to an affair and allowed me to turn the children against their mother. Claire testified that I had always resented her, imposed rigid rules, and used 2 weeks of unsupervised access to frighten the children. She described the Costa Rica tickets as a vacation and said the missing passports had been packed for convenience. I made mistakes in my marriage, she said, her voice breaking. That does not make me an unsafe mother. Nathan testified. He admitted he had worked too much, avoided conflict, and surrendered most family responsibilities to Claire. Rebecca did not polish those failures away. Nathan described changing his schedule and learning the routines he should have shared. When Claire's attorney called his involvement strategic, he answered, "It began because I was afraid. It continues because my children deserved a father before this happened." For a moment, I remembered the soup she had brought after Richard's funeral. People rarely become only the worst thing they have done. Rebecca did not answer emotion with cruelty. She presented Nathan's credit report, bank statements, the escrow transfer, the one-way itinerary, and the preserved messages about bringing the children to Florida. The digital forensics consultant explained what the metadata could establish and, just as importantly, what it could not. Dr. Wallace testified about emotional coercion and the children's anxiety without diagnosing Claire from a distance. Patricia reported that the children had independently described similar warnings, telling Nathan would make him ill. Disclosure could split the siblings between parents, and loyalty required silence. She did not recommend permanent termination of Claire's rights. She recommended stability, continued therapy, and carefully structured contact while the family was assessed. The court-appointed guardian ad litem had met the parents, visited both homes, reviewed school and medical records, and spoken with each child. Her report did not treat the children's preferences as votes. Mason's anger, Grace's guilt, and Owen's fear were considered alongside their ages, attachments, and need for a relationship with both parents. The children did not testify in open court. They were not placed on a witness stand to accuse their mother. The magistrate spoke with them privately under the procedures available to the court, with a sealed record protecting the conversation. Then Julian Bennett entered. He looked older than he had in the boat photograph. His attorney sat behind him. Julian had provided records after learning that money from Nathan and Claire's joint account had funded the condominium deposit. He testified that Claire told him the marriage was effectively over and that Nathan knew she planned to relocate. "When did you realize that was untrue?" Rebecca asked. "When her husband's attorney contacted mine." Julian admitted that he expected Claire and the children to live with him. He also admitted that he had never spoken with Nathan, reviewed a parenting agreement, or confirmed Claire had permission to move the children. Rebecca asked what Claire had said about Nathan's response. Julian stared at the table. She said, "Once the kids are in Florida, Nathan will pay anything to get access." Claire closed her eyes. Julian was not rescuing us. He was protecting himself from becoming responsible for disputed funds and a plan he now claimed he had misunderstood. His cooperation did not make him innocent. But self-interest could still reveal the truth. After a recess, the magistrate continued Nathan's designation as temporary residential parent. Claire received supervised parenting time at a family services center, with the possibility of expanded contact based on professional recommendations and compliance. Both parents were ordered to participate in counseling and forbidden from using the children as messengers. The children were to remain in Ohio. Their passports would be held through an agreed secure arrangement. Financial questions, including allocation of the credit card debt and the condominium deposit, were reserved for the divorce proceedings. No police officer entered. Claire was not handcuffed. The court did not declare Nathan a perfect father or me a heroic grandmother. It simply placed boundaries around a family that had forgotten how to make them. Outside, Claire passed close enough for me to smell her perfume. "You won," she whispered. I shook my head. "No," I said. The children finally stopped losing. 6 months later, our family was not restored to what it had been. That was the first lesson of healing. Restoration is not always the goal. Sometimes the healthiest future is built from different rooms, difficult boundaries, and love that no longer requires pretending. Nathan and Claire's divorce moved slowly. The condominium purchase never closed, and part of the escrow deposit returned to the marital estate after fees. In the property division, Claire was required to account for concealed transfers and assume responsibility for debts traced to the cards opened in Nathan's name. Separate fraud reviews continued through the financial institutions. There was no magical check restoring every dollar. Claire did not disappear, go to prison, or lose her children forever. She moved into a small apartment outside Columbus and attended individual counseling. Her visits began under supervision. Some went well. During others, she tried to explain too much, blamed Nathan, or asked questions the children were not ready to answer. The supervisor redirected her. Progress was measured not by apologies but by whether she could hear no without making a child responsible for her pain. At Grace's winter concert, Claire sat with her supervisor 3 rows ahead of us. When Grace found both parents in the audience, her narrow shoulders relaxed. Nathan did not approach Claire, and Claire did not demand a family photograph afterward. Each quietly waited to congratulate their daughter. It looked cold to anyone who believed healing required reunion. To Grace, it was kindness. 2 adults remaining in the same room without asking her to manage the distance between them. On the drive home, she sang every song again, louder than the choir had. Grace still missed her. After one visit, she cried in my car and said, "I wish Mom could be who she is when she's happy." I did not correct her. "You're allowed to love the good parts," I said. "You're also allowed to be safe from the hurtful ones." Mason remained angry, although anger no longer controlled every room he entered. Dr. Wallace helped him understand that protecting Grace and Owen did not require becoming another parent. Owen stopped asking whether Nathan would die, then asked again after a difficult phone call. Healing did not travel in a straight line. Most importantly, the children no longer kept secrets that made their stomachs hurt. Nathan changed too. He received the promotion he had been working toward, but negotiated a schedule with fewer overnight inspections. He learned to pack lunches, attend teacher conferences, and sit through silence without trying to solve it. On Thursdays, he cooked. The meals were rarely impressive, but no one mistook burnt rice for abandonment. As for me, retirement stopped feeling like a room someone had locked me inside. I cleared Richard's old workshop, painted the walls warm yellow, and opened a Saturday art class for neighborhood children. I charged families who could afford it and reserved free spaces for children referred by the local community center. We painted birds, built cardboard cities, and learned that mistakes could become texture. Claire once said retirement meant I had nothing important to do. She had been wrong, but so had I had believed usefulness required being needed at any cost. The children did not need a grandmother who surrendered every boundary. They needed one who could remain loving without disappearing. On Mother's Day, Nathan and the children arrived carrying grocery store flowers and an envelope thick enough to worry me. Inside was Nathan's updated will, nominating me as the children's guardian if he died while they were minors. There was also a family emergency plan. current medical information, school authorizations appropriate for emergencies, and instructions for contacting Rebecca. This doesn't appoint you automatically, Nathan said. A court would still decide what serves the children. But I want the law to know who I trust. The papers were not a gift children could grant. And they were not a prediction of disaster. They were evidence that Nathan had stopped confusing love with avoiding frightening possibilities. Beneath them were 3 letters. Mason thanked me for not treating him like a bad kid when he behaved badly. Grace had drawn the 2 houses again. This time, she had placed herself on a bridge between them. The bridge had railings. Owen's letter was mostly pictures. At the bottom, in uneven pencil, he had written, "Grandma Evelyn, the one who stayed." I held the page against my chest. Staying, I understood, did not mean standing still while people hurt you. It did not mean preserving a family's appearance or accepting every demand made in the name of love. Sometimes staying meant telling the truth. Sometimes it meant setting a boundary and remaining on the other side of it with the porch light on. And sometimes it meant teaching frightened children that a broken beginning could still become a beautiful new chapter, one honest day at a time.